Good evening, everybody. I'm Bruce Whitfield. You are part of a Money Show panel discussion this evening of erudite leaders of South Africa's mining industry. We've got Peter Major, who is a mining analyst. He is Director of Mining at Mergence Corporate Solutions. We've got next to him Fortune Mojapelo, the founder and chief executive at Bushveld Minerals. We've also got Shirley Weber, the coverage head of natural resources at Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, and Neil Fruneman, chief executive officer at Sibanye Stillwater. They are our panel this evening. If you have any questions that you would like to put to our panel, Charles, you can talk to your clients afterwards. Charles, you can talk to your clients afterwards. You need to lead by example and come to the front. There we go. As we can everybody hear quite clearly so that we're not competing for airtime. Who in the room has an MBA? Who in the room has an MBA? Usually we find MBA students very keen to put their hands up and show us that they do have an MBA, but I was in Davos last week, Charles was in Davos last week, and there were rules on panel discussions in Davos. And when you open up a panel discussion, you have 15 seconds to make a pertinent point about the mining industry. 15 seconds on opening statements. So, Peter Major, because you're practiced at this kind of thing, you're the first one to get 15 seconds to talk mining and the industry. Crisis, opportunity, whatever you like, take your 15 seconds.
Bruce, you don't need me or an industry executive to tell you about mining. Just read the Business Day. And if you're really intellectual, read Financial Mail. That's all you need to know. Everything in it is 90% true of the mining industry in the state. You don't need any of us here to tell you.
Okay, but from your perspective, do you see opportunity in South African mining more than you might have under Mosebenzi Zwane perhaps 3 or 4 years ago?
I'm afraid that Gwede Mantashe to me is doing more damage than even Zwane did. And the women before Gwede were actually starting to look good compared to what Gwede has not done. And if somebody doesn't realize that in government, there's not going to be anything left to legislate here.
Now, that's the comment I was looking for in 15 seconds. Gwede Mantashe is doing more damage than his predecessors. We'll pick up on that one in a bit. Fortune Mojapelo, I'm not going to ask you if you agree with Peter Major's assessment, but in 15 seconds or less, your assessment of mining opportunities?
Well, what I would say is that with all the challenges that we have in Africa, I think the energy transition offers an incredible opportunity that is really for the mining industry to capture. And it is not just for the mining industry, I think it's for the rest of the continent. And it's almost a once-in-a-generation opportunity.
A once-in-a-generation opportunity which we may or may not squander, depending, of course, on how the regulators work. At Shirley Weber, where do you see our mining sector?
I do think there's a lot of opportunities still in Africa. I think with all the problems out there, we'll have to work a lot more harder on making it all sustainable. And really with all the noise and the issues that we've seen coming out through the Mining Indaba as well, we'll have to make sure that all stakeholders actually do a lot more together to ensure that mining happens properly.
Neil Fruneman, who diversified into the US palladium market 2 years ago now, about?
That's correct, yes.
2 years ago now. Opportunities, is all your focus on this beautiful palladium at $2,250 an ounce, or have you still got time for us down here?
Absolutely, Bruce.
Just, maybe Neil, just bring it a little bit closer to you, there we go.
Okay, absolutely. I think we've got wonderful resources in this country which we are not going to develop if the government in power today continues governing the way they do. We have serious power issues, no security of power. We have a regulatory environment that's not certain, and probably most importantly, we do not have an investor-friendly environment.
So would you then agree with Peter Major's assessment that Gwede Mantashe is in fact doing more damage than his predecessors to the mining industry?
I'm not sure I would say Gwede is doing more damage. I think from a point of view of being able to engage someone that understands mining, that has been very refreshing. We could not engage Zwane. I think there are ideological ANC issues that are preventing business from blossoming. It's not specifically a Gwede Mantashe issue.
Not specifically Peter Major, Gwede Mantashe issue, you would argue differently, I suspect.
Look, I think I said Gwede Mantashe was worse than any of our previous ministers except Mr. Zwane.
Okay. But what is Gwede getting wrong that is not a political constraint? What can he do differently within the shackles that are the confines of the ANC?
I think Gwede's inherited a lot of cumbersome, unfair, illogical, unworkable legislation, and he thinks he's fixing it by adding on these other parts and components to it, and he takes too long to make decisions, and then when he does do something right, he doesn't seem to follow through. So most of his branches don't know the things that he's telling analysts and fund managers. And there's just no follow through on what he tries to do. But in the meantime, he's always adding more and more legislation, and it's taking longer and longer to get permits through all the offices than it ever did under any of his predecessors.
Fortune, I mean, again, as the CEO of an industry that is regulated by a mining minister, the last thing you want to do is pick a fight. But at the same time, if there are real issues still in South African mining that have to be dealt with, where would you sit in the discussion between Peter Major?
Look, I think that Peter is a bit harsh in his assessment. I talk from my personal experience.
But who's taking the mining industry to court? Gwede is.
No, I get that.
He doesn't accept the court's ruling, once empowered, always empowered. Now he's taking them to court.
Okay, I think to your point, Neil, there are certain ideological issues that need to be resolved, and I think it's fair to say that there's much greater engagement that is happening. I mean, I certainly haven't been part of the Mineral Council conversations in the past, but what I've observed since engaging is that there's definitely a lot more robust conversations that are going on, right? So that's the one point I would indicate. But the second point, I think, when I say it's a tad bit unfair on him, is that let's think about where we're coming from, right? And in the time that he has been in the ministry, what has taken place. I think the mining charter was a very protracted, difficult document to get sorted. It's not 100% there, but we can all agree that it has made substantial strides. And then secondly, you've got an IRP. I talk from the energy point of view, and let's consider, again, you've got two ministries that have been merged into one, which I think is a positive thing. But, you know, seeing the IRP gazetted, I think, goes some way towards getting the kind of security we need from an energy point of view. Yeah. But you can't expect that to be sorted out overnight.
Peter Major, I'm going to give you some time to respond to that. Shirley Weber, you're in this discussion whether you like it or not. How much of a mess is mining in, really? I mean, we wanted to tell happy stories of fairies and toadstools in the garden. The reality is it's still a very, very difficult environment in which to do business. Is it a better environment than it was a couple of years ago? Is it an environment in which you see improvement occurring?
I think it's a difficult question to answer because of the complexities that's around it. I think it is, because of the mining charter being out there, the financial services industry actually put a whole lot of suggestions forward to the ministry that wasn't necessarily included, you know, in the mining charter that we see now. So, is it going to be easier going forward? I think a lot more clarity should be put out there. We don't want regulations changing regularly, and unfortunately, for funding, it is important to have a stable regulatory environment, to have stable electricity, you know. Certainty around so many things is needed for the mining industry to be successful, and it's not necessarily all there.
Neil Froneman, what's going to make you invest more money in South Africa?
Well, certainly regulatory certainty, security of power, and a much more balanced Labour Relations Act. And perhaps the best way to sum it up, it's got to become more business-friendly than it is now. It's not a business-friendly environment.
Not a business-friendly environment. Fortune Mochapelo, your experience is slightly different to that in terms of it being sufficiently business-friendly. However, it's not an environment, Peter Major, that is going to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Are we making sufficient progress to sustain a competitive South African mining industry, or are we on a hiding to nothing?
I think we're still on a trend heading down. How can you be sustainable in an environment that is changing constantly? And mining depends on electricity, but it's getting more unpredictable, more expensive every day. Mining depends on communities working with you, but the community mafia is stronger than ever. Mining depends on consistent legislation that's going in your direction instead of against you. But we just see legislation being added. So I don't know, how can it get stronger? How can it even level off under that environment?
I hear the term community mafia, which is an emotive call. Neil Frenneman, you, I am told, fairly recently read the Riot Act to the Department of Mineral Resources, saying if we can't co-generate electricity, if we cannot produce power, then we are going to have a real problem in South Africa. You're going to have to start cutting workers more aggressively than you had to in the consolidation of Lonmin, for example.
Yes, Bruce, that is correct. And
I can't hear anything.
and unfortunately, let me say fortunately, the engagement with the minister actually was quite positive in that post the debate we were able to actually create a joint task team to actually look into these issues about approvals, energy approval projects. It's part of the solution to Eskom's problems.
Do you believe what he had to say today in his opening address at the Mining Indaba when it comes to the South African government realizes it needs to create a competitor to Eskom, which is in itself, we're from the government, we're here to help you, government going into competition with itself. But do you believe the intent to allow competition to Eskom?
I think it's important to improve the efficiency of Eskom and their cost structure. So I do think competition in a capitalistic society leads to better outcomes for all. My personal opinion is we should all be working to fix Eskom rather than creating a competitor at the moment. Eskom needs help. We all joined at the hip. If Eskom fails, we all fail, not just business. Everybody fails. So the effort should be going into making Eskom work better, providing some short-term solutions by co-generation of power for own use is important. It's going to release energy into the network for other industrial users that can't do it. But ultimately, competition is healthy, and if it's introduced the right way, I do think it's right. There's one more thing I want to say. I don't believe government runs a business effectively anywhere in the world. So a state-owned competitor to Eskom, to me, is a recipe for a disaster.
Andre de Ruyter as chief executive of Eskom, does he have a chance in hell?
Well, first of all, how well did he do at Nampak? Second of all,
there are those who argue in his defense that Nampak would have died without him.
Well, he was there for 6-7 years and it never stopped going downhill. But how can one man take on an army of miscreants that have worked for 20 years to destroy something so big and large? So I don't think he's got a chance in hell, but I give him credit for trying.
Okay, no chance in hell, Fortune?
I would say that the task is massive, but I don't think we have any choice. Eskom needs to get fixed one way or another. The point I would say, though, is giving Eskom some space, some breathing room in terms of fixing it. And to your point, Neil, earlier on, I think the announcement by the minister today around allowing companies to self-generate by simply registering, that's going to go a long way, I think, to alleviating the demand on the utility. But to imagine that you can do away or wish away Eskom, I think that is folly.
No, we can't. We certainly can't wish it away. It is the Albatross, and it's rotting around our necks. I mean, the stench is going up through our nostrils. The point is, and I'm not too sure if you guys aren't being a little bit too frustrated in the real trenches and sitting way back in the ivory tower, that we're not registering steps that are made, progressive steps that are being made. Shirley, you're shaking your head. You're saying that I've lost my marbles.
No, I think it's absolutely correct. I think co-generation, like Neil has said, I think is absolutely important. However, putting out a notice, from a personal point of view, putting out a notice, that companies can go and, get the licenses to generate is not fixing the problem. I think there's still the man on the street out there, apart from the companies, who's dependent on Eskom and will be dependent on Eskom for a very long time. I do think measures must be put in place to fix that as well. I think co-generation, as I've mentioned, is definitely a need is there, but we can't get rid of the problem by moving responsibility somewhere else. It must be fixed for the greater community.
Absolutely, and you've got streams of activity happening. You've got Andre de Ruyter with his fireman's outfit on, frantically putting out fires all over Eskom. At the same time, hopefully you've got people like Neil Furneman and Fortune Mojapelo who are saying, you know what, we can generate our own electricity. We need X number of megawatts per day. We can generate twice as much as that and feed it onto the grid. Pie in the sky stuff, Peter Major.
Bruce, I got a question for you. You're head of Eskom. You buy 120 million tons a year
Of coal,
of coal.
right?
80 million tons you pay 400 rand a ton for. The other 40 million tons, you pay 1,700 for. Now Gwede's talking to the guys who are getting 400, asking them to cut their price. Why isn't he touching the guys that charge 1,700?
If I was the chief executive at Eskom, I'd be renegotiating contracts as a first priority. And Andre de Ruyter, being a coal guy who understands the stuff better than I do, well, than most people do, is the guy to do it, sure.
He better have bodyguards night and day around him and his family. That's the coal mafia that's getting 1,700, and other protectors are in government. And then, so labor is your biggest cost, and coal buying is almost your second biggest cost, tied with labor. So those two things are untouchable. Gwede and de Ruyter can't touch labor, and they can't touch the coal mafia that's charging 1,700 a ton.
So why then are all of these idiots in this room persisting in the mining trade? If it is such a dead end, why is anybody even bothering?
Because if you admit those are the problems, somebody might say, let's address them. Let's not call them a holy cow. Let's address them head on and take it.
But I'd say this, Bruce. There is such a thing as disruption, which I think can be a very powerful force, right? Let's talk Eskom still.
Sure.
If the majority of big users of power who can self-generate went to self-generation on a long-term basis and they came off the grid completely, you've got anti-selection going on right there, which would hurt the customer profile of an Eskom, and in my view will make the chances of an Eskom recovery even more difficult, right? But why it needs to be done and resolved still is that, we run an operation that takes 14 megawatts, so we're not a massive user of electricity. If it came to it and we needed to self-generate with large-scale battery storage for a huge chunk of it, we can do that. So I think that there is a way in which the security of power can be resolved if independent of Eskom, if necessary independent of Eskom. But the second thing I want to say is that when we're talking electricity and energy supply, I really think it's an opportunity for Africa, because globally the energy transition presents a massive market opportunity for mining industry.
It does, once we got the policy in place and once we get through an 18-month period of building and once we plug the gaps. In the short term, however, in the real world, people are losing jobs, families are losing hope. South Africa's unemployment rate at 40%, with youth unemployment measuring at 56%. All of this data, which you look at, which tells you that we are sitting on a powder keg of a very, very high-risk situation. And that's where I think the frustration comes from, Neil Furneman, when you are considering the long-term future for a Sibanye-Stillwater in South Africa.
Yes. Absolutely, Bruce. I think the numbers that actually speak for themselves. So a low growth rate means there's a lack of investment. Why is there a lack of investment? Because there's these issues we've discussed tonight. One of the key issues is energy security. There's only so much renewable energy that can be brought to the grid. We consume 750 megawatts as a business.
750 megawatts a day.
Yes.
Right.
And putting in a solar power plant of 150 megawatts is only part of the solution. So I think people's negativity, if I can call it that.
Perspective.
Features in the numbers. There's a lack of investment, and that's a fact. Okay, and I think the government needs to assess why there's no investment. If everything seems to be okay, from their point of view, it's not. Okay, that's why Sibanye-Stillwater is probably ex-growth in South Africa at the moment, because as I said, this is not an environment I can go to my board and motivate a substantial capital commitment, because I can't tell you what the cost of power is, I can't tell you if we're going to have power, I can't tell you what the regulatory environment is going to be, and that's why there's no investment, no material investment in South Africa.
And you can't trust a spirit of glasnost and sort of a slightly friendlier environment than there was a while ago, because you don't know who the next minerals and energy minister is going to be.
No, exactly. Listen, as I've said, I'm positive towards Gwede and his attempt to change things.
Yeah.
I think he's constrained because of ideological and party issues. But the fact is that I cannot, and neither can any board member, adhere to their fiduciary duty and make big capital investments in that environment. Just cannot happen.
Shirley Weber, what's it going to take? I mean, how do we calm down Peter Major to a way when Fortune Mojapelo and Neil Froneman listen to him, they go, oh good, something has changed, something has turned?
I think it's going to take a bit of time in order for everyone to settle down. I do think too many changes from one minister to another is also not good for a country. I think if we talk about any corporate or to any investor, they will have to make a decision. Do they want to put money, investing in South Africa, or they'd rather do it in West Africa where there's a bigger story?
Okay, so let's look outside of South Africa. Do we decide, can we agree that South Africa is not a place to invest a cent until there is more certainty? Can we agree?
I agree.
We agree. Fortune disagrees, which I like.
Not entirely, because I'm investing in South Africa and doing pretty well with it. I must say, yes, it's got its challenges. I have to be clear. I accept that. But, if I have to choose today where, within the space I'm active in, which is vanadium, where we're going to invest next, I'm afraid South Africa is where the resource base is.
Is there another vanadium field anywhere, Peter Major, that Fortune can invest in? Because he needs some guidance.
Vanadium's more common than iron ore nowadays. Australia, although we still have the majority here in this country.
So Fortune's got a particular set of circumstances which are driving his investment decision making in South Africa. He doesn't want to go live in Australia. It's too full of South Africans and other Australians.
No, look, I have to say that if we talk vanadium, but I don't think it's only vanadium we can talk about PGMs. If you really want PGMs, where else are you going to go? So one way or another, I think that, I'm not going to say we're stuck with South Africa, because we want to invest in South Africa, we want in South Africa to grow, and yes, all the regulatory issues need to be resolved. But I mean, if I look at Sibanye, the company is doing fantastically well. Yes, on the back of some acquisitions.
It's got a little palladium asset in America, and palladium's trading at $2,250 an ounce, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. He's going to do okay. I mean, but isn't that the argument ultimately then against South African investment, Peter Major? Because you can do better elsewhere, reliable labour environments, reliable policy environments, it's just easier.
Bruce, as Neil says, our party members are locked in this ideological cell and they don't know how to get out of it. And it's so easy to get out of it. Nothing was in worse shape than the DRC all through the 80s and 90s. Zambia was following the DRC, not as bad, but almost. Their copper production, DRC and Zambia, they were tied with Chile in the 70s. So both those industries reduced almost nothing. And what did they do? You might call it a big bang. They threw out this cumbersome, gigantic mass of legislation and policy that destroyed their industry. They threw it out the door. They said, guys, come in, build copper mines, tax-free holiday, import what you need, just build it. Both those countries got tens of billions of dollars in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got a couple billion. They got tens of billions. They were in much, much worse shape than us. And our guys are too afraid to move and even lift a finger to start doing something like that.
What stops them, Neil Froneman? What stops South Africa's regulators, government, Department of Mineral Resources, from being that tough and doing the job.
Yeah, listen, my view is that within the party they've got issues, competing interests, and instead of looking
So it's all
at,
corruption. It's all corruption.
well, I'm not saying it's corruption. I'm saying it's competing interests,
It's corruption.
and the real issue is they should be thinking in the national interest, not the party interest.
And personal
that's-
interests and members of the party's personal interests.
It's the national interest that's missing in this.
Shirley, you're nodding quietly,
No.
not wanting to enter into the political debate.
No, I do think there's absolutely willing investors out there for South Africa and many of the for the African countries.
I'll pay for their
However-
names and numbers. I'll pay you whatever you want.
No, but you know, Peter, I think if we look at our mining entities in South Africa specifically, they are there. I think many of them are reconsidering their options. And I do think we need to realize from a South African government and regulation point of view that we need to do something to ensure that we retain it. I think time will be running out. Are we going to have the same conversation in the next 3 or 4 years?
Yes, we will.
I hope not, because that's what we would want to believe
Yeah.
in, that sanity prevails and we're doing the right thing for the country.
Neil, you want to add to that?
Yeah, look, I want to say, although I'm critical, I think we're part of the solution.
Yeah.
And part of the solution is actually demanding performance from a government that is clearly not reacting and perhaps even influencing them in the right direction. So although I'm negative, I'm still proudly South African, and if we build a company more offshore, it's going to be a proudly South African company, and like the Springboks, win the game of rugby all over the world. That's what we're going to do. Now,
But it's a tragic lost opportunity, though, for a country that is well endowed with natural resources, with the opportunity to exploit those natural resources for the benefit of a country.
absolutely, and that's what it actually makes me cross, that we are missing the second bull run in a period of 10 or 15 years, where Peter's already described how so many billions of dollars went to countries that actually addressed their mining code, created certainty. We are going to miss that boat again. And the low economic growth with the social issues that we've got is we're sitting on a time bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we all have a duty to solve this problem.
Okay, so how do we resolve it? I'm smelling food, and I'm watching people drink glasses of wine, and I'm feeling left out. So I'd like to participate in some of the largesse of the Western Cape. So how then do we do silent diplomacy, Fortune? Do we be nice to government, or do we go Peter Major on government? What is the most effective means of communication that gets the message through? Because the message is never spared, the message is always shared. People, when they've got a minister's ear, will be very clear as to what is required. They'll get a pat on the head and told, we hear you, we take you seriously, and nothing changes. And that's where the frustration comes from. Fortune.
And I think there is a middle of the road somewhere. My approach is the following. I think that if certain things do not change, right, we're going to be forced. We talk again back to Eskom, right? Just now with SAA going to business rescue, the prospect of an Eskom going into business rescue is frankly very, very scary, right? And crisis can sharpen and focus, I think, the minds in some ways. Personally, when I look at this, I think, yeah, we have a lot to resolve. Within that is some opportunity. You correctly said earlier on, Shirley, hopefully in 3 years' time, we're not having the same conversation, and that from a regulatory point of view, we're seeing more and more certainty. I have some hope based on at least some of the engagement that I'm seeing, but it's hope, right? Let's give it a chance, but hedging your bets at the same time. What I mean by that, I think, again, from a power point of view, self-generating is one part of it. Two, in terms of developing the resource base that we're doing, I mean, we developed our resource base targeting brownfield assets because, quite frankly, to go spend $300 million on a totally greenfield is a difficult proposition in this place. So, yeah, there are those types of challenges, and hopefully, in my view, in 3 years' time, the bets that we are all making in the industry today do pay off.
Neville Chamberlain came back from a visit to Munich in 1939 waving a piece of paper saying, peace in our time. He had hope. He had hope. Hope, tragically, Peter Major, is not a strategy. What are the three things that the South African government could do within the massive constraints that Neil and others have painted for us this evening, realistically, that could be done to instill at least the smallest glimmer of hope and optimism in the South African mining industry?
I don't think it's difficult. We only need one bold man in government. One bold man
Or woman.
to say, I'm going to do what's right for the country. And if it's throw out all this garbage mining legislation and say, let's just start with the 10 Commandments and we'll slowly add to that, that's a statement, and he backs it up. And yes, he'll probably get assassinated or fired, but that will start a chain reaction, and another bold man will take his place.
I don't want to dismiss that lovely view, but Ebrahim Patel, if you ever want to see a smile on Ebrahim Patel's face, just say regulation. And then he goes, how much? And then he gets happy. And I'm afraid we're in an environment which loves rules, it loves regulation, mostly so that people can know which ones to break, but that's a cynical view. What's going to make you, Neil Fruneman, dig another deep hole to extract a commodity in South Africa?
Well, you know, it's the issues I described earlier. You know, it's an investor-friendly environment. It's legal tenure. It's all those things. I don't want to repeat them, but what I want to say, a little bit opposite to what Fortune said, is what we've done in the past hasn't worked. So being polite and beating around the bush is sending mixed messages to government.
It helps to be quite clear and direct.
We have to, more than clear, we actually have to start demanding. We are citizens, we vote them into power, we want action, and we need to demand. Now, business has very significant levers it can pull on the economic front. There are banks that are part of business. Somewhere the till must close on value destruction, putting money in to refinance state-owned entities which are not strategic anyway. Eskom is different. Eskom serves the entire public. SAA is I really don't know why we run it, why we put another 2 billion. But that's a separate discussion. But I think business has the keys to actually influencing government to do the right thing. So it cannot be what we've done in the past. It hasn't worked. There needs to be a change, and business needs to get more demanding and alive.
It needs to toughen up a little bit.
Exactly.
Okay, Shirley Weber, I'll give the final word to you, and then we can have a glass of wine.
I just wanted to say, I think, you know, as a financial institution, we need to make sure that wherever we use our funding, that apart from a commercially viable project, is obviously to ensure that we do everything for the communities around it, you know, that economic growth actually happens. However, if there's any stakeholder that's got too much power and not helping the overall economy to grow by not making proper decisions for the country, I think it all becomes a problem. And I mean, we've got shareholders that we have to satisfy as well from a returns point of view. It all just needs to work together, and currently there's mismatches.
There's mismatches. So I know that I said that was final, but absolutely finally, maybe, unless there's another question. Neil Fruneman's point to say, okay, Shirley, why don't you close off the taps and stop funding certain projects? Why don't you recommend to the new boss out of government at ABSA that actually we start playing a little bit of hardball, start squeezing where it hurts, perhaps? Is that a strategy that we could ever begin to consider from an environment that's also regulated, by the way, by the state? It seems like a bit of a pipe dream. It's an interesting pipe dream, but a pipe dream nevertheless.
I don't think that will be the solution, because it's not fixing the actual problems, you know, that we.
But everything we've tried up until now hasn't worked, to Neil Fruneman's point. So how then do we force a change?
Good question, Bruce.
And on that cop-out, good night.